Hello and welcome back to another episode of Strong Collectors Comics. My name is Jordan and I'm joined today, as ever, by my plucky co host, Dakota. And we love all things comic book movies, as you know here. There's one actor that comic book movies just haven't gotten to nail down yet, and that's none other than Tom Hanks. And Tom Hanks had some very insightful things to say about the nature of comic book movies and where they are today. So, Dakota, roll the clip.
We talked about the whole comic book saturation of the universe. You're not against it, you said, if it's the right thing. Did I manifest anything?
Because you can make anything happen on screen now, we are being brought back to the concept, okay, that's true, but what is the story? We would see these fantastic movies, either DC or MCU or whatever it is, in order to see kind of like these better versions of ourselves. God, I feel like an X-Man sometimes. I'm as
Yeah.
confused as Spider-Man. I'm as angry as Batman is. And I love my country as much as Captain America, you know? So I would like to emulate all those guys.
Have you ever broken bread with the James Gunn at DC, Kevin Feige at Marvel?
No, no. I think it's because I don't think I'm not in their wheelhouse. Not against it, I guess, but at the same time, it's like, and I will tell you this right now, Josh Horowitz.
Yeah.
My combo plate is quite full.
Now, that's not all Tom Hanks had to say. If you'd like, you can check out the full interview with Josh Horowitz, where he does have a segment where he elaborates more on some of those ideas. Essentially, what he's talking about is the fact that comic book movies in the past, he talks about the 70s, 80s, 60s, even. A lot of it didn't work because the technology wasn't quite there, right? I think it makes sense that we had a big boom in comic book movies as special effects and technology improved, which he pointed out. The other thing he said, as mentioned in that clip, is the idea of the more you're exposed to a kind of story, especially comic book stories, you're not as wowed by the spectacle, right? Like we're not blown away, I don't think, the same way we were when we first saw the first Avengers because it was like
Mhm.
brand new. And
Right.
he's kind of saying now that the audience is a little bit used to it, there's almost that corporate side of, well, this works, so we're going to keep doing it. And there can be an audience side of, we've seen this before. What's new? Beyond explosions or cool effects, what's the story? What does this mean? And what are you bringing to the table? Which I found interesting. Dakota, how do those statements resonate with you from Mr. Hanks?
Yeah, no, I think it definitely makes sense, especially, taking it back to the beginning of the MCU with Iron Man. Like, I remember seeing Iron Man, and granted, I was quite a bit younger then, but like seeing that and like Iron Man take off and fly, or even just like the suit being put on him, that
Mm-hmm.
blew my mind. Kind of going outside the MCU, but like sticking within like special effects and everything. The first Transformers movie, like out of
Mm-hmm.
the like modern era, obviously, like live action with Shia LaBeouf, I was like, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen.
Right.
And then I don't even know how many movies they had after that with Transformers, but they just kind of repeat. And then by the last one, I don't even think I've seen the last two or three,
Mm-hmm.
because it's like I've seen the Transformers transform, and I kind of get where this is going. And I
Right.
think that's kind of what he's saying is sort of happening with those superhero movies, like within the MCU, or even how DC kind of was, where
Mm-hmm.
it's just kind of following a too similar of a recipe, and it's not. It doesn't have that like wow factor of within storytelling or visually.
Mm-hmm.
You can't
Yeah.
just bank on the visuals to carry it anymore.
Right. Yeah. And I think I find that is the general response. I don't know. To a lot of people, it's like, how many versions of Spider-Man or Batman have we seen, right? And I think unless you're a nerd or like nerd out, it's like, no, no, this one's cool because it's doing this, new
Yeah.
thing. I do think there is a general struggle in that, even with the character, like whether it's familiarity with the whole idea of like a superhero movie, team ups, all that, but even the character, right? Because you're like, I've seen or I have my favorite Spider-Man movie, I have my favorite Batman movie. Why do I need to see this new one?
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense. Because, like, you're just, if anything, you're going to just be compared to the one you love.
Yeah.
And yet, how much does that stop you from, well, maybe we can have a new take on this character?
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that's where it's important what he said about the audience kind of getting ahead of the, I have some thoughts on these, like, is it the studios that are, or the creatives that are kind of driving a lot of these stories?
Mm.
I think typically, usually it's the studios. You wonder how much control the creative people have. But I think when it gets to that point of, yeah, this movie. I think like we saw, like remember Guardians of the Galaxy came out and it kind of had that quippy, fun vibe. And Suicide Squad seemed like it was going to have this kind of grittier, darker thing, which I think would have been kind of cool and different to see in the mainstream Marvel DC. And then they kind of pivoted to recut it to make it kind of quippy and fun, and like,
Mhm.
and then it totally flopped. And I think that is the mistake of saying, well, because this did really well, we need to do that exact same thing.
Mhm.
I don't necessarily think, like, I think we come back to these characters because we do love them, but it's like a fine line, right? Because you don't want it to make it so different it's unrecognizable, and yet you don't want to do something so similar that it's just boring.
Right. Yeah, and I feel like that's like I said, it's kind of like you can't just carry the franchise because it's the franchise so much anyway. And I think we see that a lot with the MCU right now for sure, where
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's like a meme every day posted of like the MCU's trash, the MCU's back, the MCU's trash, the MCU's back. But like, and I know you've just kind of said this with like a lot of different like, especially Disney Plus shows. It's like what is the goal of me watching? Like, what is the story? What's the journey I'm on? And
Mm-hmm.
what's the point of that journey?
Yeah.
So and I think, I don't know, I'm much more in the camp of like, I don't always need to have a great story, especially with like the MCU shows. I'm much more lenient
Mm-hmm.
on. I think those can be just
Yeah.
kind of a little bit more of a fun time. Whereas like the big budget movies, like those should probably be a little bit more, which I guess it might even be easier to like flip flop that of a whole show could probably take you on a much better storytelling journey
Right.
than you could in like a 2 hour movie. But
Mm-hmm.
maybe that's just me.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense, and I think that's why it's cool that they're putting more effort into like shows. I mean,
Hmm.
like, I've been real into the Penguin, and I think the Penguin
Hmm.
does a good job of making it feel cinematic, and yet it's a show, but it's developing things that you couldn't really do in a movie. And I think there is, yeah, a piece of that story. To me, I think the biggest thing is the characters, because I think like if you have a good character and it's well developed and people connect to that character, usually they'll follow that character wherever you want, right? Like I think
True.
that's why like a character like we make the jokes of Batman, Batman in space, Batman underwater, Batman
Hmm.
caveman. But it's like if you have this cool character, people are interested in like, oh, how would Batman respond to this new situation? Or how would he, because we're bought in because we want to know what happens to him. And I think that was the thread of the MCU was people were invested in these characters. And even if they didn't know where they were going to go, they wanted to know where they'd go. And I do think that's been some of the MCU lately is kind of not really having that consistent sense of characters that you follow and buy into and build up. Um, and I think that it will be interesting to see in like the James Gunn DCU. I think Superman will be an interesting test of that because
Hmm.
everybody knows Superman, right? We're all familiar with Superman. The Man of Steel movies, whether you love them or hate them, didn't quite work, I think, with what they wanted it to do, like objectively and launching and carrying this whole thing.
Hmm.
So I am curious to see, even like financially, is the Superman movie going to be like a box office smash? Are people going to go show up for Superman? I think that is kind of an interesting litmus test of like how much can you take this super familiar character or super familiar scenario and still make it interesting and relevant. And I think that's an important part is like examining from different lenses. Not so much you don't understand the character or you lose it, but saying what does this character mean today rather than like we're just doing this homage to the 60s or 70s or 80s
Hmm.
like and that's why I think James Gunn is cool because I do think he takes things that people love about these characters and puts new spins on them while still respecting it. But I am very curious to see how Superman is going to do, and I think that will tell a lot about where people are generally
Hmm.
with some of these stories.
Yeah, and I kind of wonder with that too, of like kind of like how you said, like they're going to put their own spin on Superman and the stories. I kind of wonder if that's because I would rather see that too, but I think there's a lot of people when it's like you get, whether it's like a named story of like the DCU is going to do Blackest Night. If they don't
Mm-hmm.
follow Blackest Night to the T, you're going to have the like comic book fans be like, "Oh, this is trash. It's not the way it's supposed to be." Even if it's a good story. So I almost kind of wonder if there's like like people are gonna be disappointed if you do it the right way because it's just gonna kind of be like, oh, I already know
Mhm.
this story. Like, there's nothing new and fresh here. It wasn't that exciting. But then
Yeah.
if you do it your own way, it's not the way it
Mm.
was supposed to be. So then there's kind of that like
Mhm.
you're kind of just never gonna win.
Yeah, personally, I'm more into, and I like how the MCU would do this. They take like themes or basic like beats from comic stories, but be like, we're
Hmm.
going to use it just as a framework or a launching board for
Yeah.
our own story.
Hmm.
Um, because yeah, I mean, I do think it's a mistake to rely on, well, because you liked this comic, you're going to love this movie because it
Right.
worked as a comic because it was a comic. Like there's things comics can do that movies just can't. And there's things movies
Right.
can do that comics can. Stealing all this from Alan Moore, by the way, if you want to go read writing for comics. It's a great little read, not just on writing comics, but storytelling in general in comics. Um, but I think like if you're also then just relying on, well, you love Spider-Man, so you're gonna like this movie. And like I think just relying on like the brand loyalty, I think
Hmm.
I always find a little bit like it sounds dramatic if I'm going to say it's offensive or disrespectful, but just to be like, well, because you like Batman, you're going to watch this Batman movie. And it's like, well, give me a reason why I should watch this Batman movie. And I do think that's where it comes down to you've put a lot of effort into like bringing something either new to the table or some way to look at it. And if you can't think of it, just put it on pause and wait for me until you come up with a reason to do it. Then
Yeah.
just like we got to throw a Batman movie out there.
True.
Because you and I know there's no shortage of comic characters that you can dig into that you could make
Hmm.
cool. Like Iron Man, well, we've talked about that. Never would have thought of like Iron Man's going to carry the whole Marvel Universe movie
Right.
franchise. I've been like, it's probably going to be Captain America or Spider Man or something, but it was centered on Iron Man.
Yeah.
So I do think when you can't use all these like bangers that everybody loves, you kind of have to get creative. And they
Hmm.
had to be like, how can, like you said, just make a sweet first Iron Man movie that got everybody on board, and then you go from there. Um, so, and that's what's interesting about Superman. He's probably the most famous superhero on the planet. I mean, I think that's pretty agreed upon. Would you say?
I think so. I mean, you could argue that Batman or Spider-Man could give him a run for his money, but I think as far as longevity goes, like
Mm-hmm.
the kid is going to know who Superman is, and your grandpa's going to know who Superman is.
Yeah. So I think that it will be very interesting to see. And I would not want the job of writing or directing a Superman movie because I mean that's tough. Because
Yeah.
like you said, if you have 8-year-olds and 70-year-olds who are like, oh yeah, I like Superman, I love him. That's really tough to
Hmm.
like meet that whole group. So
Hmm.
maybe that's the trouble with comics in general because you have so many people that love comics, whether it's kids, teens, adults, older adults, and like when it becomes a movie, it almost is how do we cater to everybody? And maybe it's okay to say, there's certain demographics that might enjoy this. But I think you kind of lose something when you make it this has to appeal to everybody.
Yeah. Very true.
Those are some of our thoughts on Tom Hanks' thoughts on comic book movies. So thank you for listening to two guys talking about a guy talking about stuff. Let us know below what you think about Tom Hanks' take about the state of comic book movies in general. What do they need? How do they stay fresh? Maybe they're perfect the way they are. Please be liking, sharing, subscribing. And until next time, as always, stay strong.
Who would you cast Tom Hanks to be in the MCU?
Ooh, I was thinking about that earlier.
Like, even
I
if it was
think,
just like at any point in his career, like even younger Tom Hanks
oh,
or current
wow.
Tom
I'd pull him out
Hanks.
of the time stream.
Yeah.
If you went back to like 80s Tom Hanks, man, honestly, I think there's a time, even in like, ugh, in like the big era where he's kind of young Tom Hanks. My brain went honestly right to like a Captain America. Maybe that sounds cheesy or like out of the wall, but I think he always, at least in those, I think he can emulate a lot of that just earnestness and like
True.
goodness. Like he's got like kind of like a Woody. To me, a Woody is
Yeah.
kind of an archetype for Captain America. Like
Yeah.
you get into bad situations, but he kind of like it's very different, of course.
Mhm.
But to me, that would have been an interesting take. I think nowadays, I want him to be a good guy. Would you want him to be
Yeah,
a good guy? I think he's
I
gonna be a
agree.
good guy.
I was kind of thinking like a General Ross type of thing, which I guess is kind of not really good or bad guy, but
If it's
kind of more
today,
bad. Yeah,
yeah, if it was today, I could see him.
just see him with a very general type voice.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd take him as like an antagonistic general though.
Okay.
Maybe we could get him as, I was thinking of like an X-Men.
Oh,
Maybe he's a little older for that though. An Avenger. It almost, does he have to be comedic though? No, I think he
no.
can be serious.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say, I'd take Tom Hanks as an Uncle Ben.
Oh, okay. I like that. Good call.
I think younger Tom Hanks maybe could have had a more obviously longevity, serious role. Not serious, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I would like to see him though. I think he'd pull off a mean Tom, or even if you got him in the DCU, like a Pa Kent type,
That's a good idea. I like it.
or like a Perry White,
Yeah.
or a Jay Jonah.
I
I'm going to keep going.
was gonna say, how many other old people are there in the
I don't know.
comics?
How many old guys can we get? Maybe I'm
Jarvis?
too on the nose. Ooh, Jarvis. Good call.